What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
Hey guys, what is going on? It's the week 3 Fantasy Points UFL breakdown. I'm here with Millionaire Maker winner and one of the winningest spring football DFS players of all time, Neil Orfield. Neil, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. It's some shakeups for our Brahmas, which were kind of unexpected and not ideal, I think. But yeah, overall, I'm feeling good. I'm excited. I'm going to my brother's house tonight to watch the Timberwolves game. Now, and I don't know how much you follow NBA basketball, but the Timberwolves had like the biggest meltdown I've ever seen earlier this week, and now tonight is essentially like not a must-win game, but a very, very important game between them and the Memphis Grizzlies. So going to watch that later. So yeah, I'm having a good day.
Nice. That sounds like a good time. I'm not a huge NBA fan, but I do keep a casual eye on it. I hope the Timberwolves do well for your sake, Neil.
Thank you.
We had a pretty good week 2 over on the site. One of our subs, Kyle, who was with us last year, again subbed this year, won the 333, which was awesome for him. Had a few other people do pretty well. Was also a strong week of props. So wanted to throw that out there before I promote the Fantasy Points UFL package. If you're betting any player props, playing any DFS, really think you're going to want to subscribe to either our UFL package or our all-in package, which includes UFL, college football, NFL premium, and the Fantasy Points data suite. You can save 20%, by the way, on our all-in package with promo code ALLUFL. Here's what you get with our UFL product, though. You get projections for every player in every game. You get main slate DFS ownership projections, a weekly written breakdown of the DFS slate that's currently live over on the site, access to our paywall Discord where I provide notes on coach speak, insider info, and breakdowns of single game showdown and Sunday only DFS slates. You also get our official picks for UFL player props, generally a very soft market over there. So definitely head over to fantasypoints.com and check out that package. Neil, I think it's time for us to get into these games. To me, there are 2 games that really stick out from like a game stacking perspective. And the Friday night game is one of them. It's the Arlington Renegades at the Birmingham Stallions. Arlington is a 3.5 point underdog here. Total is a slate high 39.5. Neil, before I mention injuries, is there anything about this betting line that sticks out to you?
Yeah, and the line is Arlington 18, Birmingham 21.5.
Yeah, Arlington's a 3.5 point dog. Total is 39.5.
I'm sticking with the Birmingham. Like I just think that they're a better team than people are. After the week 1 loss, they're not getting enough credit. Arlington is honestly, I think, pretty good too. So I don't feel that strongly about it. But it's a home game for Birmingham, so I think I'm gonna take Birmingham there.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I'd probably lay off both the spread and the total here. I really don't have a strong lean. Big news for this game. Alex Magoo has been placed on IR, so this will be a Matt Corral game. I really don't think we'll see much of a rotation here. Skip Holtz sort of referenced Case Cookus coming into games as more of a potential thing that could happen mid or later in the season. So I don't think we have to worry about Cookus too much. I really do think this is going to be a full game from Corral. Other major injury note, and I guess this isn't technically injury related, but Deion Kane is out due to a personal matter. So that'll really mix things up with the wide receiver rotation here. Neil, we'll start though on the Arlington side of this game. One of the more interesting approaches I think you can take with Arlington, and we can talk about this with a few other teams, is just go with a really heavy onslaught stack. I think, the last few weeks scoring has been very, very low. And, I think that really opens the door. If one team can just get to, even 28 points, that really puts their onslaught in a good position. Last week, I was pretty surprised. I submitted a team that was Isaiah Winstead, and other than him, all St. Louis Battlehawks players, including the defense. And that team was live to win come the end of Sunday, which was very surprising to me. I think ended up finishing around 110th or something, maybe 12 or 15 points back from first. But, another St. Louis touchdown or two, and that really could have been live for first place.
Were you using SaberSim, if you don't mind me asking?
I used the solver. I think
Okay.
I might try Saber this week. It's generally a pretty, I don't know. I go back and forth on the merits. Like something like the solver or Fantasy Cruncher will take a little bit more time. And because we're getting those Sunday depth charts just a couple hours before the Friday game kicks off, I feel like the time savings of SaberSim may be worth it, but it's a very expensive product. So
I asked because so I used SaberSim last year, and there was a day that I don't know if I it wasn't the day that I came in second, but there was some day that I was competitive, and I feel like it maybe held on, did pretty well. But like I used SaberSim, and I kept getting these major onslaughts, and one of those
Yeah.
was a lineup that did really well for me last year. And so I was just wondering if that was maybe a result of using SaberSim, and maybe their algorithm is telling us something that we should be paying attention to with the big stacks. And to your point, just as far as like overstacking, I totally agree with you. Like, and this is typically like when we kind of start to see teams score a little bit more. I didn't look through the game logs from last year specifically, like, so saying week 3, I think it is around though when we start kind of seeing some teams start having bigger scores. Like typically looking through the past couple of years of spring football, we've seen really low scores weeks 1 and 2. Generally, I think there was maybe an outlier there, but like in general, scores are down weeks 1 and 2, and then like later in the year, we start to see bigger and bigger scores. But you don't see it across the board. So like you say, like if we could have if they just put up 28 points, that's four touchdowns, and you can really separate by doing some of those game stacks or team stacks rather.
Yeah, I think that's a great call. Yeah, just with these lower scoring slates, I mean, scoring has been a bit of a disappointment so far. So, I mean, really all you have to do is bet on a single team with some of these lineups. And yeah, I think Arlington is a really interesting place to start. Obviously we have a great idea of who Luis Perez is, least athletic quarterback in the league. Pretty much all of his fantasy scoring is going to come from passing. What's been interesting, at least so far, we've seen Isaiah Winstead earn a good amount of reps in the slot. He's actually leading the team in target share so far. He's right around 25%. This is, I think, a bit of a changing in the guard here in Arlington. I think we're going to see, still Sal Cannella leading the way overall, but, Winstead pretty close to him as the number 2, and then probably Vaughns as the number 3 here. Tyler Vaughns obviously hasn't done much. Neil, where are you at on Arlington? Is there anyone who sticks out from a stacking perspective? Obviously, Winstead popping as a bit of a value, but I think there are a lot of players here who are pretty viable.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the few teams that like we have several options that I think are actually pretty strong. We don't have ownership projections, do we? Or did you?
Those are live on the site.
Oh,
I was
okay.
a little late getting projections up for anyone wondering. PFF delayed their data release, so I just wanted to triple check everything before I put out our numbers. I'm sure we'll still have a few more adjustments now that PFF has released their route data, but yeah.
Yeah, so we have Sal Cannella around 13%, Isaiah Winstead 23%, Tyler Vaughns looking pretty low owned, Deontay Burnett once again low owned, and JP Payton. So I have a lot of interest in all of those. So I think that you can. I mean, it's five receivers I think are all viable in large field GPPs. Sal Cannella I think is probably like the number 1 from a you can count on in perspective, or like you can generally, and I know he didn't really get there last week, but he was hurt for part of the game. But he's going to be typically, I think, the most consistent option. I don't know that I'm willing to say it yet that Isaiah Winstead has supplanted Tyler Vaughns and is like the clear cut number 2. No, and maybe I'm too slow to react to what we've seen so far. But I kind of think that it's still somewhat of a week to week thing. We're going to see different players excel and maybe have more opportunities, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is just Isaiah Winstead. I do think he looks like a strong option, but I do have a lot of like Tyler Vaughns. I know he's kind of a pay up to be contrarian because the role has not supported that price tag, but he is in an offense that should be pretty good. We know that he was a favorite last year, so I'm not convinced that he's like going to be a complete afterthought, and it wouldn't be that shocking to us to see him come back to like wide receiver 1 usage this week in week 3. Like that's never that shocking to see a former number 1, kind of go away for a little bit. It's like Mark Andrews this year. It's like, oh, he's completely dead. Like you see it happen all the time in football where it's just like, it's a game of not that many plays, and you can think you're seeing trends that's just kind of a small sample size. So it's possible that that Isaiah Winstead has stepped up and is like the clear number 2. Like I think that is what we've seen so far. I think like you're reading the data like how it should be read, but also just like from a playing like game theory perspective, I think 4% ownership going to Tyler Vaughns, like I'm interested in that. Like he's been very good at times in the past. So I am willing to pay up to be contrarian. I think I'll be at least like 10% Tyler Vaughns, probably something like that. Deontay Burnett did really well for us last week. He seems to be, you don't buy that he's the favorite in the red zone. I read your article just now, and I don't know if I do either. I feel like we maybe saw it a little bit last year. Well, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. Last year's trends, sort of would have suggested a little more Vaughn's, a little more Canella at this point. Burnett, I believe, has 4 of 6 total red zone targets for Arlington. He's also caught a couple of conversions. So, that's interesting. I have noticed Burnett and Winstead are rotating a decent bit in and out of the slot. So, this week, maybe that could be Winstead getting those red zone looks. We could also just see them sort of default back to, like I said, Canella and Vaughn's. Yeah, I'm still really not quite sure what to make of Burnett's red zone role. I did up his touchdown rate a little bit to account for that, but obviously this could just be noise. I mean, Neil, you already touched on, we haven't seen a lot of plays. It's only been 2 weeks, especially for Arlington. We have not seen many pass plays. They've really been running the ball a ton. Sal Cannella leads the team in routes, only 47 so far. I mean, in like a shootout NFL game, a player could run 47 routes, right? In just a single contest. So, it's not a huge sample, and it's hard to make any big predictions based on what we've seen so far from these Arlington pass catchers. But I definitely do like the Tyler Vaughn's angle there. Does feel like he's going to go a little under-owned after a slow start, only a 9.5% target share through the first 2 games behind Javonte Payton, behind Deontay Burnett, behind Sal Cannella, and behind Isaiah Winstead. Neil, we got to talk backfield here. This has been an incredible workload for Day Hunter. I mean, he is getting fed touches. Last week, he had 14 carries and 2 targets in the game book. I believe PFF only credited him with 1 target. Week before, he was at 16 carries and 0 targets. I mean, this is, we're talking about 14, 15 touches a game for Day Hunter. This is very surprising. Kalen Ballage has been running better. And that's why I sort of suspect as the season goes on, we will see more and more Kalen Ballage. But they clearly really like Day Hunter. And, Davion Smith, I haven't double checked all the PFF numbers and everything, but I don't believe he logged an offensive snap last week. I really think he's just going to be occasional special teams player and then a guy who comes in at the goal line, maybe on like a 4th and 1 type play. What do you make of this backfield? One thing I'm really struggling with is what should Day Hunter's ownership be? I think the DFS field is smart enough to recognize Kalen Ballage is the better, more explosive running back, but Day Hunter's earning better usage. He's also way cheaper. Where are you at here?
Yeah, only 5,800, definitely too cheap there. And I think the field has it about right, about 25% ownership. I think that seems reasonable for Day Hunter. I think that's I was debating, like, do I want more than that? I think that's, as we go through running backs, we'll get everybody, but I think that's about where I'd want to be on Day Hunter. Like, I think he is a very strong option. He's had similar role, like slightly better, I guess, so far, but similar role for Kalen Ballage. Like you say, though, like the coach speak on Ballage, and I've continued to play. I played him last week, did not go very well. The coach speak, though, was awesome throughout the offseason. And it's not like he's like getting lapped. He's like he's had slightly fewer opportunities there, and he's been good with those opportunities. So it wouldn't be that surprising to see Kalen Ballage have a few more opportunities. Like, again, this might be a kind of a small sample size, and a bigger sample size, maybe he gets more of the rushing work share. But honestly, I think 12% also seems pretty efficient there. Like, he is significantly more expensive and getting fewer opportunities. So I think it makes sense for Day Hunter to have more ownership there. He's got about double the projected ownership on Kalen Ballage. I think I'm okay with both of those. I don't know that I want to be like significantly over. I think I probably come in over 12% on Kalen Ballage. Once again, just bet on the talent, bet on the coaches, like watching the film and being like, that's our better pure rusher. We should use him more, but not by like a ton. I will note, so I on the show last week, as we were talking about the running backs, I kept on being like, that seems too low. That seems too low. And the wide receivers, kind of the opposite a lot of the time. I ended up, for the first time ever, I set the rule I used the solver, removed wide receivers and tight ends as options in the flex. I only used running backs in the flex last week. Didn't go that well last week, because last week you really only like needed to have Jacob Sailors, and I don't think any other running back put up more than 11.8 fantasy points. That was pretty disappointing. So I don't think I'm going to set that rule again this week. I do think, like, we saw receivers start doing better later in the year last year. Like the passing game seemed to pick up. So it already didn't work last week. So I don't think I'm going to set that rule again. But I do, like, I think both of these running backs, I suppose, take it team by team. But yeah, so far, I think, Day Hunter, that seems fair. Kalen Ballage, that seems fair. My guess is that I'll come in a little bit overweight to the 12% we have on Kalen Ballage. but I'm not going to have like 40%.
Yeah. And speaking of, like rules you can set, you can, sure, you can fully exclude wide receivers and tight ends. What you can also do in the solver or in Cruncher is just add a boost to every running back. And then that way your flex will skew heavier toward running back and you won't fully exclude wide receivers. That was something I did last week. Didn't end up working out largely because I played so much Kirk Merritt, which was largely unrelated to that setting. But yeah, I'm right there with you. I think I like Ballage at ownership just a little bit more than Hunter, but I feel pretty neutral about both players relative to what we've seen so far. Just to put a bow on this, by weighted opportunity, you guys can kind of use this like expected fantasy points, how much an average player would have scored with the same workload these guys have earned. Day Hunter is at 12.3 weighted opportunities per game. Kalen Ballage at 10. Now, Kalen Ballage has averaged 13.4 DraftKings points per game, so he's exceeding his expectation. Day Hunter has fallen way under at 7.3 DraftKings fantasy points per game. So we would expect Ballage's efficiency to win out at some point, but obviously no guarantee that happens in week 3. And honestly, I would expect Day Hunter to lead the way here. That's what we have projected. All right, we can move on to a Birmingham team that is a little bit in flux this week. We have Matt Corral starting. Neil, what are your thoughts overall on playing Matt Corral, especially because, this is a really, really tough week, I think, to roster a Birmingham quarterback. And I've gone back and forth on what I think his ownership will be. No Deion Kane. And we know Birmingham loves to spread out their wide receiver usage, especially after Kane, if the last few weeks have been any indication. So where do you think you are on Corral in this passing attack?
So we've got him as the second highest projected owned quarterback on the slate. That seems a little bit high, I think. I'm just looking through the quarterback ownership, trying to see like where would I adjust here? Who would I want more of? Who do I want less of? I think it's about fair. Like I think like sub 20% ownership, but like pretty close there. It's just a good offense. Like I don't even think Matt Corral is like anything special as a fantasy asset. But I think he is like in a good enough spot with this offense. His receivers are not particularly expensive because no Deion Kane, like his typical lead receiver is out. So now we have everybody else a little bit too cheap for their role. So I think that's honestly fair. I think I'm probably going to be right there, like around 20% on Matt Corral. I think he's a strong option. And just looking at like the team totals, what is 21.5? Is that the second highest team total on the slate? So yeah, I think that it's probably fair ownership on Matt Corral. How do you see it?
Yeah, I don't know. I go back and forth. I could see Corral coming in a little bit lower just because none of these receivers are popping a ton in our projections. Davion Davis is looking like a pretty decent value here at 4,900. Outside of him, Sternberger looks okay. Jordan Thomas looks okay. I really think it's going to be some combination of Davion, Sternberger, and Marlon Williams. Davion led the team in receiving back in the 2023 USFL season. Sternberger obviously has sort of been a mainstay for them for a while. And similar with Marlon Williams, he's also one of the few wide receivers that I think they trust to play both in the slot and outside. Now, interesting to note, Amari Rogers will be back this week. So they probably won't need much slot work from Marlon Williams. May need to bring his projection down just a little bit more to account for that. But that was something I was thinking about last night as I was updating these numbers. Yeah, this is just really tough from a stacking perspective, I think. And I do wonder if that pushes Corral's ownership a bit lower than what we have projected. Like I said, though, the nice thing with Corral is that we really don't need to worry about Case Cookus here. I think he'll have a pretty long leash. So unlike sort of like Magoo the last few weeks, an interception on the first drive probably won't kill a guy like Corral. Honestly, I think my best take on Corral is that I really like him the most in like an MME set so that I don't have to think too hard about who I'm pairing him with. I can kind of mix and match those guys. If I were to play him, I believe we moved the 3-3-3 to a 2-2-2 now. I'll probably submit one or two lineups for that. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to Corral because I really don't want to take a big stand on who I think is going to catch these passes. If I had to rank him in order, I'd probably say Sternberger, then Davion Davis, then like a Marlon Williams. Really don't mind a Jordan Thomas who got multiple end zone targets last week. They love throwing him jump balls. We've seen this over and over again. The route share did dip a little bit for Jordan Thomas, only 26%. So something to keep in mind. But at 3K, if you need a punt for Corral in like the largest field tournament, I think it's okay. These other guys are just total dart throws, though, if you're playing like an Austin Watkins a Jalen Camp, anything like that. I think that's pretty tricky. Backfield here, pretty straightforward. Unlike last week, CJ Maribel will be active. No Larry Roundtree, so it'll just be Maribel and our boy Ricky Person. Both Maribel and Person are just over 7K. They have very comparable projections for us by fantasy points per dollar. They're actually the exact same play according to our numbers right now. I feel fairly neutral about both of these guys. I think you'll see them right around 10% ownership. Do you feel like taking a stand on either player, Neil?
No, we just haven't really seen the team view them as different assets. Like they're just they do split it pretty evenly. I think it's fair. Like one of these guys could just get the touchdowns, but yeah, they're about the same price, getting about the same ownership, about the same usage. I think both seem like fine plays, but I'd be more excited if one of them were out to just play the other one. But we don't have that this week.
Yeah, I believe we saw Ricky with close to 85% of backfield weighted opportunity last week, which was awesome. I mean, it's clear the team just does not trust Larry Roundtree with serious carries. It seemed like every high leverage situation, they wanted to give the ball to Ricky Person and they wanted to get Roundtree off the field. So I think that's really the only thing to keep an eye out for with this backfield is just wait for one of Maribel or Person to be out. And then you just play whoever's in and anticipate probably around 80% of backfield usage for that player. Probably won't be taking any significant stands there. We'll only have limited exposure to either guy. All right, we can move on to the Saturday game. It is the Houston Roughnecks at the Memphis Showboats. Houston is a 4.5 point underdog. This actually opened at 3 and got bet down in Memphis's favor. Total here is a slate low 35.5. Neil, this also has its own individual showdown slate, so we might have to think about this game a little bit extra this week, which is a bit unfortunate, I have to say, considering the quality of these teams, especially Houston. I do have some hope for Memphis. But Neil, before I move on to injuries, of which there are a few notes, does anything stand out to you about this betting line with Houston as a 4.5 point dog and the total at 35.5?
Oh, it's 4.5 now. Okay, what are the team totals there?
Let's see.
What do you say the overall total is?
35.5. I'd have to update. You probably
and a half.
Add half a point to Memphis and take a half point away from Houston.
I think I almost like the under on 35.5. Like,
wow.
I think these teams are going to struggle. I think that Memphis actually has like their defensive coordinator is actually pretty good. You do watch the game, like they were like they had him mic'd up and like he was like, this team likes to throw it on 2nd and 10. They like to, and it was like, yep, sure enough, like he seemed to have a good read on the opposing offense. I don't know if you watched there was a UFL stream that I watched before the season started where they were talking about all the coaching changes, and those guys, James Larson and friends, were very upset that I forget what the guy's name is, the defensive coordinator, that he did not get the head coaching job when there was a vacancy for a week. Yeah,
it's Jaron Horton. I believe they gave it to Jim Turner, who was the offensive line coach. I really like Jaron Horton. I think he's really sharp. The 2023 Pittsburgh Maulers defense is one of the best defenses we've actually seen in spring football history. That offense was absolutely terrible, but the defense really carried that team to a playoff appearance. So I think Horton certainly deserves some props. And the Memphis defense was the worst in the league last year. They're looking like, average to above average this year, which I think is a pretty massive improvement, largely thanks to new DC Jaron Horton. Don't blame me for liking the under here. I probably would like Memphis minus 4.5 just a little bit more. We're expecting close to a full game from Anthony Brown. We have him projected for about 75% of dropbacks. There's obviously massive benching risk. We also saw Nolan Henderson come in for, I forget if it was 1 drive or 2 drives last week, but the funniest part about that was, Henderson played okay. CJ Johnson said after the game, Nolan Henderson played really well. He just didn't get a lot of opportunities for whatever reason. And it's like, this is on you, man. You're in charge. But
we're all trying to find the guy who did this.
Exactly. That meme is very applicable in the UFL, especially when you're talking about the Houston Roughnecks. Wanted to note a couple injuries, and then we can start talking DFS plays. On the Houston side, Kirk Merritt has not practiced yet due to the knee and ankle injuries he suffered last week. I'm keeping a close eye on this. He did return to the game last week, but I do expect him to sit after back-to-back missed practices earlier this week. On the Memphis side, Elijah Stove has not practiced for personal reasons, certainly worth keeping an eye on. EJ Perry has been limited due to what I thought was a rib injury. They called it a flank on the injury report. I'm not really sure what that means. Something with his side body rib cage
Oblique
type area. Yeah, he's been limited. I do fully expect him to play. He was obviously in some pain last week, but he did end up finishing the game. Neil, unfortunately, we do have to talk about the Houston Roughnecks. We can probably speed through this relatively quickly. The other big news with Houston is they traded for Marcus Sims, which was really interesting. They traded one of their starting tackles away to land Marcus Sims. Starting with Anthony Brown, I don't really know if he's playable for me. I mean, I think he's terrible. I think this offense is terrible, but everyone thinks that, and he'll probably be 0.5%, 1% owned, something like that for the main slate. Probably would have been better on like a Sunday only slate. I know Furby, who's in the comments, played him on a couple Sunday only lineups, and at points those were looking pretty good. Where do you land on Anthony Brown? He's a tough one, I think.
Good for showdown. I think since we have to talk about that slate, it'll be a strong-ish showdown play
for sure.
For the 4-game slate. I don't know. It was like last week. It was like, man, he almost like broke the slate and looked like that guy was like, oh, nobody wants to play him because of the split. And then he's not a great real life quarterback, but he runs a bit, and he had some throws that kind of impressed me. The overall numbers did not look good for Anthony Brown, but there were a couple times I was like, damn, that he looked pretty good on that like specific plays.
Yeah.
Ultimately, at 1% ownership, I think in MME sets, like if you get to 1% to 5%, I think that's reasonable to take some kind of a stand there. We do have the big improvement, and part of it is they just invested in this passing game by trading for Marcus Sims. So now he has two, like by UFL standards, top 5 receivers in the league. Does he have 2 of the top 5 receivers in the league at his disposal? I think it's arguable, at least.
Probably top 8 or top 10 for sure. Top 5, I think, is more on the fence. But Justin Hall's certainly a top 5 wide receiver. And I mean, you're right. This does really shore up, especially their 11 personnel 3 wide receiver set. I think it's pretty clear we'll see Kiki Chisholm, Marcus Sims, and Justin Hall, with Hall operating in the slot. Now, the tough part for me, Neil, is like for this week, this is a new team, a new scheme. I'm not really sure what sort of route share, target share to project a guy like Sims for. I'm not even sure if he'll necessarily work ahead of Kiki Chisholm in the target earning order, although by, week 5, 6, 7, I would anticipate that happening. We could see him listed as a backup on the depth chart and only play 40% of routes. Where are you at on these wide receivers? Because to me, it really seems like Justin Hall or just ignore all these other guys.
Yeah, for the 4-game slate, I think that is defensible. Like I think that's probably like a good approach. You could, if you want to, in a 150 set, if you want to take some shots on Marcus Sims and just say like whatever, they're not running the most complicated offenses in the UFL on Houston. I think it's you could play some Marcus Sims. I think you could play a little bit of Kiki Chisholm. But I think that you're largely correct. Like we've just seen it week after week, Jake. Like we talked about it last week. I was like, I'm just going to start leaning more into the chalk, and apparently didn't lean into the chalk enough. You look at some of the winning lineups last week, it was like everybody 35+% owned, or maybe I'm exaggerating slightly, but like not by much. Like it was just like chalk absolutely smashed. So you don't need to play anybody. I don't even need to play Justin Hall, but yeah, I think that is a fine approach. I think I would actually like lean into this offense on a 2-game slate. Unfortunately, we don't get that this week. On the showdown slate, I think you can play any of Kiki Chisholm, Justin Hall, or Marcus Sims. I think even is playable, because who knows? Maybe he does just step in and right away have a 75+% route share, and he's got the talent, and maybe they throw more. But yeah, on the 4-game slate, like I said, I'm betting on the under, so I don't want to like put too much onto this team.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'm in a very similar position as you. Probably just Justin Hall and not really anybody else. We do need to talk this backfield really quick. Now, I think this backfield would be pretty interesting from a DFS perspective if we knew Kirk Merritt would be out. Again, I do anticipate Merritt being out. We haven't projected in right now. We should get that news in just a few hours here. Last week by weighted opportunities, Zaquandre White was at 7.4, Kirk Merritt was at 6.9, Lorenzo Lingard was at 1.5. This ended up being a pretty gross three-way split. Zaquandre White played a lot more than I anticipated, especially on passing downs, which is very concerning for Kirk Merritt's fantasy value in the games that they are active together. Yeah, I really don't think you can touch these guys if all three are active. If Kirk Merritt sits, I kind of like Zaquandre White. You could make an argument for Lingard as well. Maybe he's the favorite for goal line carries. We really haven't seen Houston get inside the 5 much. So especially on in an obvious run situation, generally by the time they've gotten inside the 10 or the 5, they're down a score or two and need to throw. Yeah, do you have any preference between Zaquandre White, Lorenzo Lingard, Kirk Merritt, assuming Merritt sits? Where would you be at there?
If Merritt sits, it's funny. I still am not going to have a ton of interest, just because it's like one of those, like, I don't know, multiply by 0, and it's just not a good offense. I think there'll certainly be playable. Like if you want to play like Zaquandre White at 5,200, if we assume he's the lead back. Sure, at very little ownership. I'd have to see how the ownership adjusts with Merritt out.
Yeah.
But I like if he's sub 5% owned, then yeah, I think that's a pretty strong play. But if he gets like any real ownership, I don't think either of these guys would be players that I'm like jamming in just because of the better roles. So yeah, it'll really be dependent on ownership. Lorenzo Lingard, he's 4,300. Like, what does he really need to pay off that price tag? If we get a week like last week, no, I guess we had Sailors. So, and you only really wanted one running back. It'll be tough. Like they're just, I don't know if they're going to score that many points. On the flip side, like we just saw, and I'm blanking on his name now. Davion Smith score 3 touchdowns on 3 1-yards. Like there's always that with running backs. Like no matter how bad we think the offense is, there's always the possibility of a pass interference in the end zone. Suddenly you have the ball at the 1 and they're scoring touchdowns, and you go from 4 fantasy points to 10 on that one play. So at low enough ownership, sure, I would play them at sub 5%. If either of these guys, if Merritt's out and either of these guys gets more than like 10% ownership, I think that's probably too much.
Yeah, certainly think that's reasonable. I would not want to jam in Zaquandre White if we see that Kirk Merritt is out. I'll probably want a little bit of exposure, but here's something to keep in mind. And I think, we can debate this backfield endlessly, but this is probably all that matters. Houston is last in yards per game. They're last in points per game, and they are dead last in yards per carry at 2.3. I felt pretty strange projecting every running back on a single team for like 3.3 yards per carry, but I really don't think you can justify any higher on the Houston Roughnecks. I mean, the run concepts are terrible. The defenses don't have to play them, honestly, because their offensive scheme is so bad. And, outside of their wide receivers, the personnel generally isn't great on Houston too. I mean, Anthony Brown is a very limited quarterback. So yeah, this is a limited offense. I mean, Zaquandre White could earn 60, 70% of backfield weighted opportunity and still only finish with 5 or 6 DraftKings points. So certainly something to keep in mind there. We can talk the Memphis side now. Neil, things sort of cleared up a little bit last week now that Ken Wisenhunt was back. Offensive line coach and interim head coach Jim Turner was very adamant he wanted to play everybody, and they rotated quarterbacks, they rotated wide receivers. Ken Wisenhunt did not do that nearly as much. We saw EJ Perry out there for every snap despite getting hurt, and we also saw this wide receiver rotation condense a little bit. Jonathan Adams was out there for only about 60% of routes, but he got hurt and missed a few plays. I would anticipate him playing a little bit more. Either way, still dominated in targets with a 35% target share. Kwame Lassiter was out there for 90% of routes, and then Elijah Stove and D Anderson mixed it up on the outside for basically the rest of those routes. Eli Stove was at 60%. Neil, where are you at on EJ Perry? His projections are looking pretty good, and his ownership is certainly bumped up relative to last week now that we can anticipate full games from him. Curious what you think there. Early in the week, I was thinking, EJ Perry could be a great play at like 3 or 4%, but it's looking like he's not going to be that low owned, probably closer to 10 or 15.
Yeah, I wish I could give you any kind of like hot take here. I don't really think I have one. I think that he looks like the ownership is about right. Houston is allowing the most passing yards per game, so they're bad both against the pass and the run, allowing 200 passing yards per game so far this year. I think it's obviously promising that we've seen EJ Perry, like he might be a full-time player at this point. And it's kind of nice that really like you only have to consider 2 of his receivers. So like we talked about some of the other places, like you have to consider like who mix and match these 5 different guys. Really, I don't think you have to consider anybody outside of Jonathan Adams and Kwame Lassiter. Like, do you think there's anybody else that's playable?
Not really. So if Elijah Stove misses, D. Anderson would be a little bit interesting. 4,600 I think is a reasonable price, and I'd probably assign him a decent chunk of Eli Stove's workload on the outside. But you'll also see Kyle Loxley mix in a bit too. So, a guy like D. Anderson could still be capped at, say, 65% of routes, even if Eli Stove misses. I think you're generally right on the money here between Kwame Lassiter and Jonathan Adams. Lassiter could have pushed for double-digit DraftKings points last week. I know he had like a 40-yard catch called back, and I believe a few other longer targets sail over his head. Jonathan Adams has looked outstanding. I mean, I think a big part of this is that previous coaching staffs have treated him really only as a jump ball specialist, and it's clear he's much more than that. I also think it's possible Jonathan Adams has made strides in just his own raw skill. And, like I mentioned earlier, this is a much improved route tree for Jonathan Adams. He's really being respected by this offense as a true alpha wide receiver who can do it all. I said prior to week 1 that, we could anticipate maybe like a Mike Williams type role for a guy like Jonathan Adams, and then maybe like a Keenan Allen type role for a guy like Kwame Lassiter, because, Ken Wisenhunt was a while ago the offensive play caller for the Los Angeles Chargers. Right now, it feels like Jonathan Adams is kind of representing both of those players, and his target share has been absolutely insane. I believe over 30% in back-to-back weeks, and he's hauling in everything. Yeah, 31% week 1, 35% in week 2 in terms of Jonathan Adams' target share. So he feels like a really strong play. I am curious what you think of his projected ownership this week. Pushing 50% for us, and at 7,600 it's easy to argue that he's a great value. He has a really strong projection. I'm just not sure how I want to fall on him relative to that ownership. Maybe a little underweight. I mean, this is obviously an offense that has some issues. EJ Perry is a little bit limited as a quarterback. Really curious what your thoughts are.
I think it's a little bit too much. Yeah. Like
Okay.
I think 47%, I would be under that number. I think he had 1 catch at halftime last week.
Yeah.
With that said, like the EJ Perry was like, we need to get him right. That was he has nearly 200 yards. We need to get him to 200 when he was really like he was almost at 100. But like he was talking about like wanting to get him the ball, like specifically like we need to get the ball to Jonathan Adams. So you love hearing that for like if you're betting on a player, like hearing his quarterback be like, we need to get him the ball, which a lot of times with UFL receiving corps, it's like you don't really know like who's the preference. You're dealing with small sample size, whatever. But hearing the quarterback say like, we need to get him the ball, we want to get him over that mark, is like, all right, if they're going to force feed him the ball, just like we talked about last week, like kind of going to eat just the best plays, and he's clearly one of them. My guess is I come in underweight on 47%, but like not by that much. Like maybe I'll have 35 to 40%. I still think he's clearly a strong play. But like we saw in the first half last week, like sometimes these games also move quickly. And we've talked about that before.
Yeah.
Like just the clock moves, which can be like, it's the reason that I historically have been like, I'm not just going to eat the chalk. I'm going to play these different guys because the chalk doesn't always get there because they don't have that many plays. Sometimes if just like things don't fall the right way, sometimes you're just not going to have that many pass plays in the game for a team. So I'll just bet on like guys who could score a touchdown, who whatever. So on the one hand, I'm like, I'm just going to eat the chalk a lot of the time, but also like it can fail. So like 47% is getting to the point where it's like, all right, I think I'd rather bet against that for Jonathan Adams. So yeah, I think I'll be underweight to that, but I don't think it's like a terrible number. And then where do we have Kwame Lassiter's?
Only at 5%. It really didn't seem like people were super willing to play him last week. And there is still a decent amount of wide receiver value on the board. Guys like Isaiah Winstead, Jacob Harris especially, are going to draw more of that mid-low end wide receiver ownership than Lassiter, who feels like a bit more of a speculative bet compared to some of those other guys.
Yeah, I'm willing to make that bet though. That
yeah,
good enough role that I'll especially against Houston. Like these guys a little bit more likely to see spike weeks against a defense like Houston. So yeah, I think I'll have over 5% there for sure.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, Lassiter's only really competing with Isaiah Henney in the slot. I believe Henney had, and I think lost, a fumble last week. He has been very, very fumble prone in the very limited number of touches that he's gotten over the last couple seasons with either the Houston Roughnecks last year or now with the Memphis Showboats this year. So, that probably helps secure Kwame Lassiter's route share a little bit more going forward. All right, Neil, let's breeze through this backfield. It's pretty interesting. Jacob Cabote actually led the way in terms of raw weighted opportunity last week at 14.3, which was the second best number of the week behind only Jacob Sailors. Now, he only scored 4.3 fantasy points. I still think Deneric Prince is the better back here, and I have Deneric projected for a slightly better workload, but where do you fall in this backfield?
I'm with you. I still think Deneric Prince probably the better bet in general. He's 6,900, not getting a ton of ownership. I actually really like it. Like Deneric Prince looks like a really strong play to me. Again, because of this matchup and because they should be playing with the lead. Like it's one of the few games that they're going to be favored this year, I think. So it could be just a play the defense and the running back. Like this could be a great spot to play the defense and the running back, or just play these guys. I'll have plenty as one-offs also. But yeah, I think 7% Deneric Prince that's a number that I want to be significantly, at least double that. I would say maybe probably more than that. The matchup is great. The price is fine. The role is okay. And Cabote, we don't have the log for who's going to play the depth chart this week yet, right?
We do not. We should get that in a few hours. Always possible Cabote is an active in favor of Jalen Jackson. And the fact that they've sort of rotated these two in terms of who active and who isn't, I think just speaks to the fact Prince has been listed as the RB1 in back-to-back weeks. I think at the end of the day he is the RB1, but he probably can't earn more than 60% ish of backfield weighted opportunities, similar to what we've seen in Michigan between Matt Colburn and Nate McCrary, where there's just a clear cap on total backfield usage. Don't disagree, though. I think Prince combined with the Memphis defense, which is going to be very, very popular this week, the defense that is a pretty interesting stack here. If Memphis absolutely dominates, a guy like Deneric Prince could find the end zone a couple times. That's an interesting angle and an interesting way to sort of negate some of the chalk ownership that you're eating on the Memphis defense. Alrighty, we can move on here to our San Antonio Brahmas at the Michigan Panthers. This game will kick off the Sunday only slate. Brahmas are 5.5 point underdogs. Total here is just 36. Neil, any bets that you like for this one?
Oh man. Can I take the I'll take the Brahmas with the points. Man, it's been rough. It's been really rough for the Brahmas, and now they lost their offensive coordinator. I don't even know if I mean it when I say I would take the Brahmas plus the points here. It's just such a gross situation with the during the week losing your offensive coordinator. I have no idea how the team is going to react to that. Are they just going to be a complete mess? Maybe if there was, and we read it was written some places that maybe there was some butting of the heads there in terms of play calling. If that, maybe get rid of that, maybe it's a little more cohesive if we just have this is the game plan, we're just going to do this. But yeah, it's I don't feel that great about any bets here.
Yeah, I also don't really feel strongly about anything. Part of me is a little tempted by the under. I could see both of these offenses playing a bit under their expectation, but I can't say I have a strong lean. In terms of injuries, John Lovett was limited on Wednesday, so that's worth keeping an eye on after he missed week 2, waiting for that other injury report, and should get final word right around 6 p.m. on Friday on Lovett's status. On the Michigan side, Matthew Colburn has been moved to IR, so he is going to miss several weeks. Initially, Mike Nolan said they were really hoping he could avoid IR. Turns out, unfortunately, he cannot. Nate McCrary also limited on Wednesday. I believe he was dealing with either a knee or an ankle issue. I think he goes. He did come back into the game last week, but that's obviously an injury that is worth keeping an eye on. We fully expect Jaden Sheridan to be up for the Michigan Panthers. Neil, we can start with the San Antonio side, and I guess we have to start by obviously acknowledging that AJ Smith stepped down, I believe it was Tuesday night, and then was reported Wednesday. And like you hinted at, it does seem like there was a bit of a sort of philosophical, schematic butting of the heads between AJ and Wade. I think Wade wanted to push San Antonio a bit more toward a pro-style offense. I've heard rumors that, something like the way Cam Newton was used in Carolina back in the day when he, had his MVP season and was obviously a great player for them, is kind of how they want to use Kellen Mond in this current offense. Obviously, AJ Smith, not as prone to using heavier sets and hadn't really been designing a ton of runs. Also seems like there may have been a bit of an ideological dispute between how much pre-snap motion and play action they were using, which I think is pretty interesting. I know, AJ Smith has generally been on the cutting edge of that side of things. And based on Wednesdays with Wade, it seems like Wade Phillips doesn't really believe in pre-snap motion or play action a ton, which was an interesting take. But we could see a bit of an offensive shift here. We could see heavier sets, more 11 personnel, maybe even a little bit more 12 from a team like San Antonio. I also think we'll see more designed runs for Kellen Mond. Hard to know exactly how much, and I've only bumped his design rush share in our projections a little bit. But I think especially near the goal line, that could be pretty powerful for Mond's fantasy viability. Tough to know what to do, though, with a team that just changed OCs. I mean, they won't change everything. This all happened within the span of a week. The wide receivers coach, Peyton Pardee, has now taken over as offensive coordinator. So you'd expect him to use similar language and would probably take a decent chunk from AJ Smith's playbook. But like I said, it does seem like Wade was sort of pushing this offense in a particular direction. Where are you at on San Antonio for DFS, Kellen Mond, and these pass catchers? Obviously, Jacob Harris looks like a good value. Outside of that, are you interested in stacks here at all?
A little bit. Like Mond at 5%, I've been playing, I've been over the field both weeks so far, and it has just been gross. And you watch the game, it's just like, it doesn't even feel like they have a chance. It just feels like this is just not going anywhere. I do think Wednesdays with Wade, he kind of alluded to wanting to do more design quarterback runs, and he's sort of alluded to it in the past. So we just got to get him more designed runs. So maybe if he's taking a little bit more control of the play calling, maybe they do some more designed runs for Kellen Mond, like you said. Hard to know, like you said, exactly how much to bump him up there, but I don't know. Like I also think they've probably gotten a little bit unlucky with their lack of scoring. Like they haven't been. Does he have any passing touchdowns on the year? I can't even remember a single one.
I believe Corbin and Lovett have both of their offensive touchdowns so far. I don't think I'm missing any.
So I think just like a little bit of positive regression in terms of passing touchdowns. If he throws one and then a little bit more rushing, like if he runs for 40 yards, suddenly you're looking, I don't know. I think they're a pass. I think that 5% is still a little bit light just for the upside there. In a game that they're going to have to throw it most likely to keep up. It's tough opponent. Panthers defense also lost Breeland Speaks, so maybe a little bit of an easier spot. So I think I'll be overweight to Kellen Mond, not by a ton, because again, it doesn't look good. Like just watch him, it's like, man, I regret every single lineup I have with this team. But I think I'll go back to it, give him a shot while they're down, and then I think Jontre Kirkland, just his role is good enough that he's always viable. Now it is like we're down to, he's only 16% ownership this week. I think that's lighter than we've seen in the past for Jontre Kirkland, and it makes sense just given how bad they have been. But I still think that's a fair number there. He's still their top receiver. Like you said, Jacob Harris, just he's too cheap for his role. Looks good. 33% ownership seems about fine to me for Jacob Harris. I think I'd probably come in underweight there, just because there are some other lower owned plays I think are just as intriguing, I guess, like as far as the upside case goes. I actually think Greg Ward at 6,000 getting zero ownership is pretty interesting to me. We just saw him, he had like a 60-yard play last week. I think Greg Ward is a good like low owned dart throw for large field tournaments.
Yeah, 100% of routes for Greg Ward last week. And you would figure, if they go to more 11, more heavier sets, something like 12, Greg Ward would come off the field. I don't anticipate they'll run a lot of that, but 11, he should be on the field over Marquez Stevenson. It does seem like they clearly favor Ward over Speedy Stevenson. So yeah, Ward's an interesting angle, especially if you are going to fire a decent number of Kellen Mond lineups. I'll probably also be a little overweight Mond. Basically just betting that Wade Phillips is kind of telling the truth with this quarterback rushing here. For the backfield, I think we really just need to get this depth chart to see if it's going to be a super gross three-way committee between John Lovett, Jayshon Corbin, and Anthony McFarland, or if we're going to get closer to the split that we saw last week. Jayshon Corbin, 13.6 weighted opportunities. Anthony McFarland, just 7.4. Pretty clearly preferred Corbin over McFarland, which, again, is surprising. McFarland still looks explosive and efficient. And obviously he was extremely explosive and efficient last season, but it does seem like Corbin would have the edge if Lovett sits.
Do you think, I'm just curious, like with the change, with the change in offensive coordinator, there were some discussions on Twitter between Brandon Silvers, the former Brahmas quarterback, and Kellen Mond about it being reported. Silvers basically saying like, well, AJ Smith didn't have any personnel decisions, like he couldn't make any personnel decisions. Do you think that includes personnel decisions as far as like Anthony McFarland versus Jayshon Corbin, or like does that change at all, you think, with AJ Smith being gone? Or like, I guess if you had no say, maybe it's the same. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would figure if he didn't really have much of a say in personnel decisions, I can't imagine the new offensive coordinator would have more of a say, right? I mean, that's probably coming from the top with Wade, telling him to rotate backs or whatever. But, for what it's worth, AJ Smith did always have great things to say about Jayshon Corbin. So I really don't think he minded playing Corbin over McFarland. That'll be interesting to keep an eye on for sure, is, how they rotate these players in general, but especially the backfield if we only see McFarland and Corbin. I believe, later in the game last week, San Antonio did end up running a lot of plays in that like fourth quarter. It seemed to be all Corbin, and he did end up scoring that touchdown. So that was one of the things Chris Wack helps me with projections. And he was like, are you sure, Corbin with a higher touchdown rate than McFarland? And I was like, I think he'll have the edge at the goal line. That ended up being true. I think that'll be true going forward. But again, a lot in flux here with the San Antonio team. So I don't necessarily hate the idea if you're submitting 20 plus lineups of saying, hey, maybe Anthony McFarland does push for a 60% snap share and, does break a couple of these runs off. Maybe that's viable, but I'd certainly consider Corbin the better play overall. Obviously that's what our numbers suggest.
I played a lot of Anthony McFarland last week with Lovett out. I thought Anthony McFarland could have like a really bell cow role, and man, that was disappointing. I got it, and pretty surprising. I thought after last year, it seemed like Wade was always saying really positive things about both Anthony McFarland and John Lovett. Like, seemed like he really liked those guys, and I was just like, nope, you're the backup now. So it goes.
Pretty disappointing usage so far for McFarland. Now, the good news, Neil, is, I mentioned last week, maybe if I tweet enough about McFarland's efficiency, AJ Smith would see my tweets and he would bump McFarland up the depth chart. Peyton Pardee also follows me on Twitter. So I still have the same in. If I just keep tweeting about this, maybe we can force Anthony McFarland higher up the depth chart. But of course, if Lovett is active, I don't think I really want anything to do with this backfield for the 4-game slate. For the 2-game slate, I'd probably just take shots on the guys who are most likely to score touchdowns, which would be Lovett, Corbin, in that order. McFarland doesn't really seem to be getting many reps inside the 20s. Michigan Panthers side, Neil, we have a lot of interesting coach speak on the Panthers side of things for this game. I think the most concerning piece of coach speak was, to me, Bryce Perkins has clearly been the better quarterback, both statistically and watching these games. I actually had the opportunity to ask Mike Nolan about the quarterback split on, I think it was Tuesday. I said, are you guys any closer to declaring a starter? I will get the exact quote pulled up here. I don't want to misquote him. So he looked a little annoyed, which was surprising. Nolan's a really nice guy, so I was surprised that I had annoyed him slightly with the question. And he responded with, I think both are very capable and very confident players, but neither one has stepped up and said, I'm the guy. And in that same answer, he said that while they've played Perkins more so far, they really want to return to a 50-50 split, and this is in quotes, we will try to stay more true to that moving forward. So I sort of pinched these projected dropbacks. Last couple of weeks, I had Perkins with about 75%, Danny Etling with about 25%, because I sort of just expected Perkins to win out. We have seen Perkins earn almost exactly 75% of dropbacks over the last couple of weeks. Unfortunately, I've, like I said, pinched them a little bit more. It's now about 60-40 in Perkins' favor. To me, this moves Perkins from like very interesting tournament play that I had considered him the last few weeks to closer to unplayable. If we assume Nolan's being honest with, really wanting to get Etling in there, I think, Neil, at the very least, we can anticipate at least a full quarter worth of drives from Danny Etling. And that does really hurt Perkins' upside. Granted, he is a guy who could post the highest quarterback score in 3 quarters. Of course, concern that could only be 2 quarters this week. Where are you at on Bryce Perkins? And then we can talk these pass catchers, which are very interesting and good amount of value opening up on the Michigan side with receivers.
Yeah, it's so hard to read this one because I don't think he really has like the Adrian Martinez upside. Maybe he does, like against San Antonio. Like they've been so poor defensively. I'm just like thinking about like best case scenario. Like let's say he plays the full game. I think he does have enough upside that he's like almost playable. But I think you describe it as borderline unplayable. I think that's exactly right. Like he's in a 150 set. If you want to take some shots there, sure. Like, I don't think it's like the same like atomic or like likelihood of hitting an atomic upside that somebody like Adrian Martinez has. So we don't have quite that situation. And he is getting some projected ownership too. So like he also doesn't have that going for him where it's like you're going to be the only one who has him. So yeah, I think it's probably a stay away for the most part. Like maybe I'll have a couple shares in a 150 set, but I unless we get a better quote that's like, no, Bryce Perkins is the guy. But yeah, just based on the quote that you posted in your article, I find that really, really hard to play. And if it turns out the coach is a liar, then we can adjust going forward. But for this week, with it being a fairly small contest, like none of the tournaments are that big, I don't really think we need to go there.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, historically Nolan has been pretty honest in his coach speak. In my own, sort of mental coach speak index, he would be up there in terms of just overall honesty on player usage, which makes that Perkins quote a little bit more disappointing. I think I'll have some Perkins in Sunday only. I'm not going to get there on the main slate. Maybe
I like it for the 2-gamer.
Maybe 1 out of 50 teams for me on the main slate. Even that feels a little bit thin, but I do think there are a lot of pass catchers we can go to on the Michigan side of things. Really starts with COC Mariner and Malik Turner. Turner obviously popping as a very strong value this week at just 4,100. Both of these guys are full-time players, and they just lost Marcus Sims. So we can only assume that they're going to see more action. Interestingly, Mike Nolan had this to say about the trade. He said Sims has been injured a lot over the last few years, and that lack of practice availability, combined with the fact that we have a lot of confidence in the guys we've added, Jalen Moore, Malik Turner, COC Mariner, those 3 guys in particular. I did think it was a little interesting that while Mike Nolan said this, the Michigan Panthers GM, I believe it's Steve Kazor, said Xavier Malone too. You could hear that in the background. Nolan did not acknowledge that. He didn't throw that in. He's only referenced Xavier Malone as a returner. Also thought it was a little interesting he left out Samson Nakua, who I do think is live for reps here. We saw Nakua earn some reps. He's a bigger guy, and we also saw him earn reps on the outside last season near the end. I'm sort of anticipating that what was Marcus Sims' role will be split in some capacity between Jalen Moore and Samson Nakua. We could also see Malik Turner rotate outside, and then I would expect Jalen Moore especially would be the favorite to come in for those slot reps that Malik Turner would be vacating. This is tricky to assess for main slate. I think I'm largely going to stick to Mariner and Turner, but I wouldn't blame anybody for wanting to take a shot on Jalen Moore, who's had great coach speak. It just really hasn't shown a ton in the playing time so far. I'm curious where you're at on these wide receivers, Neil.
Yeah, I think like Mariner and Turner are like clearly the safest, best options. That's funny. Like I wanted to say Nakua as the third. Like he at least like he scored the touchdown, but still like he's not running that many routes. He seems like the one that like I don't know, like you see him in the game a little bit more, but maybe that's just because he scored the touchdown. Your guy, your former guy, right? Devin Ross. He's a Bearcat, right? Is that Devin Ross?
You're thinking of Devin Gray.
Who's
no longer with the team, unfortunately. Yeah, but
It's hard to know what to do behind Mariner and Turner.
Yeah.
I agree. Like Jalen Moore, just based on your coach speak, is like, I think I agree with you. Like that's more of a 2-gamer. You want to take a shot. I think that's totally fine, but doesn't really look that great. Xavier Malone, and until he starts like playing actual reps as a receiver, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So for me, it'd probably be like Mariner just looks good. Like he's the clear top receiver at this point. I think Malik Turner looks like a good value option. If you want to, I think Samson Nakua probably the next one that I would be most likely to take a shot on, but everybody beyond Mariner and Turner, I think, is pretty thin.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'll be really interested to see how they rotate these guys, especially Nakua and Jalen Moore. I want to say they have the confidence to play Nakua both inside and outside, but it just doesn't seem like they have a lot of confidence in Nakua overall. I mean, his route numbers have not been particularly great these last few weeks. Devin Ross, I think, is the least likely to see an increase. It seems to me like they only view him as a returner and more of a gimmick guy that they can throw like a screen to, maybe 2 screens to per game. They don't really give him a ton of real routes when they are. They're generally just wind sprints. Backfield here, I think, is going to be pretty fun as well. We saw Nate McCrary, largely dominate usage last week. Part of that was because he earned 4 consecutive carries inside the 5, was stuffed on all 4 last week against Birmingham. That was something. That was an incredible sequence. But either way, no Matthew Colburn. We've heard great coach speak on Jaden Sheridan, and I'm loosely expecting Sheridan to just sort of step in and take Colburn's old role. So, roughly 40, maybe 45% at the absolute most of backfield weighted opportunity. McCrary still the heavy favorite, though, for red zone work. In terms of backfield red zone touches, McCrary has earned 8 of 9 so far. And I believe Sheridan is actually, let me double check this. He's 5 pounds lighter than Colburn, so that probably makes him slightly less likely to earn those inside the 10, inside the 5 carries. I like McCrary a lot. I was surprised his ownership came in maybe 10 or 12% lower than what we had projected last week. I think he's once again a pretty strong play, especially in a game where, unlike last week, we do expect the Michigan Panthers to win here.
Yeah, sadly we do. I played I loved the ownership I saw on McCrary. I was like, oh, this is a smash. I had so much more than the field, and then he was just pretty disappointing. I'm going right back there. Unfortunately, our Brahmas have allowed 170. I was just there, and then I went away from the 171 rushing yards per game so far this year. The game they're favored to be to lose again. Our Brahmas. It is in Birmingham. So yeah, not Birmingham, Michigan. So yeah, I think it's a kind of a smash spot here. I'll be going right back to Nate McCrary. I think he's going to lead the backfield in a great spot against what has been a pretty bad. Now it was not this week, but last week on Wednesdays with Wade, where he mentioned that they're going to start loading the box more, and I thought they were going to be a little better. They were, I think, slightly better defensively this week, but they were still just kind of a train wreck. And I think that no reason to believe they've fixed it within the past week. Maybe they have, but I think that Nate McCrary is a pretty great play and somebody that I'm going to be. I mean, we've got him at 24%. Maybe he does get up there again. I think that's a number I'm probably going to be on top of. But I also think Jaden Sheridan. Like, if you think Jaden Sheridan is going to get 40% of the work at min price, and maybe they. Sadly, it's possible that they blow out the Brahmas and he gets extra run. I actually think he's a pretty intriguing contrarian play just to throw into some large field tournament lineups.
Yeah, I think that's definitely viable, especially for Sunday only. I think Sheridan is a guy that I'm going to want to fire on a decent bit. Like I said, coach speak on Sheridan has generally been really good. I think they just love Colburn and McCrary, which was why Sheridan didn't manage to be active. And I would also assume he doesn't offer much on special teams because they did note they'd keep a third running back active only if he really helped them out on special teams. All right, I think we have covered this game fully. We can move on to our final game here. It's the DC Defenders at the St. Louis Battlehawks. DC is a 6.5 point underdog here. The total is 38.5. Neil, any bets that stand out to you here? I kind of like St. Louis minus 6.5. I mean, they have looked incredible both on film and statistically. This offense looks borderline unstoppable. I mean, it's basically all read options, screens, RPOs. Pretty similar to how I run my offense in college football 25, and it's working quite well in the UFL. What do you think about this betting line?
How is it working in college football 25?
Oh, it works. It works really well. I basically set my offense up so that as long as I make, it's like one read, as long as I make that one read correct, we're cruising down the field. 6 yards per carry, easy, Neil.
Nice. I mean, on the one hand, so DC is only allowed 127.5 passing yards per game, 104 rushing yards per game. So that is the fewest passing yards per game. Second. St. Louis has allowed fewer. Interesting. So this is not two defense that have done quite well against the pass. But yeah, it's been a very strong defense. But they also just lost their defensive coordinator, who's like what I think Greg Williams, one of the biggest names, like probably a bigger name than a lot of the head coaches, like just
Oh,
like
yeah.
people when you talk about the UFL. I don't know what that does to a team. Like that's one of those things. It's like I don't know what, like losing your defensive coordinator midweek in the season. Like I would think it's a pretty negative blow to the defense. But maybe like they're already in motion. They know the plays. They know what they're doing. I don't know. I don't know how to read that. I think I'm with you though that I would take St. Louis with the points most likely.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. Interesting note on Greg Williams, who I totally agree with you. I think probably more notable than almost all the head coaches in the league. One of the more infamous NFL defensive coordinators of the last 10 or 20 years. I mean, as Bounty Gate was obviously a thing. And then I believe he got fired by the Jets on a famous, they were up, like 4 points, and he zeroed blitzed with like 3 seconds left, and the opposing team hit a Hail Mary for the win or to get into field goal range. It was something along those lines. And then like I remember all the talking heads the next day were just like, why would Greg Williams do this? And, people were coming in to his defense and saying it's all he does is cover zero. It's like the only play he knows. His son did take over as the DC here. So we probably don't see a schematic change. You never know what that does to, the morale or the ambition of the team, but all these guys are trying to make the NFL. So try not to read too much into it. Again, I think we see a very similar scheme defensively, and this has been a good defense so far, but certainly interesting to note as we talk about the DFS side of things. Injury note, Hakeem Butler, who missed last week, he did not practice on Wednesday. Manny Wilkins was also limited on Wednesday. Both players are dealing with hamstring issues. I expect Wilkins to go. Butler is the guy we need to keep more of an eye on here. Neil, we can start with the defender side. I feel like we've been doing this show for a while, and this is just another one of those weeks where I feel very neutral about playing a guy like Jordan Te'amu and a lot of his receivers, especially relative to the ownership we have projected. Where do you fall on Te'amu in this passing attack?
Yeah, I think that's really well said. Like Te'amu is coming in 16% ownership. That feels about right. Like he's kind of a sure thing. He'll have a spike week here or there. We know he's going to be out there for every play. Doesn't run that much. I feel like he used to run more a few years ago. Maybe I'm misremembering, but
he's kind of had some volatility in his rushing numbers. It's come and gone throughout his spring football career.
I think 16% feels fine to me on Te'amu. Like if I had to guess, my guess is that I come in underweight there, but honestly not by much. I think that's fine. It's not a great matchup with St. Louis, as we mentioned. St. Louis only allowing 118 passing yards per game so far this year, and only 103 rushing yards. So it's a really tough spot here for Jordan Te'amu, and he is pretty expensive. So yeah, ultimately I probably come in a little bit underweight on Te'amu. I think his pass catchers, like I do have a lot of interest in the pass catchers. Once again, I think Ty Scott, the price has moved up, so is no longer like just a slam him in there, but 40% ownership. I probably come in a little bit underweight there on Ty Scott, but I think he's obviously a viable fine play if you have 8,900 left over. I think he's a perfectly reasonable player to throw in there, but I think like I said, I'll come in underweight to 40%, I would guess. Cornell Powell, 5,000. I like the price there. He's not getting crazy high ownership, so I think I probably end up a little bit higher than the field on Cornell Powell. I think Chris Rowland, we liked him last week. 6,700, 8% ownership. Like the price tag is not ideal. Like it's again a little bit like he's probably a little bit too expensive for his role, but not by like that much. And then the ownership is low as a result. And we've seen like his spike week. So I think I still like it with Rowland. I think I'm probably going to be overweight there as well. So I think I'll be those are the only three I think we have to consider playing from DC. And I think I'm going to be probably a little bit underweight on Ty Scott. He's still the one that I'll have the most of, and I'll probably be a little bit overweight on both Rowland and Powell.
Yeah, we saw last week, 11 personnel, pretty condensed sets, and this team runs a lot of 11, some 12 too. 93% route share for Ty Scott, 77% for Chris Rowland, which I think is a nice improvement. Always good to see, they split this slot role last year. It was kind of looking like a split a little bit after week one. Nice to see Rowland pushing for a bit more ownership, or excuse me, a bit higher route share there. And then Cornell Powell was at 80%. Really, my only note, I think you covered it pretty well, is that to me, Powell, and ownership kind of reflects this, but not fully. He's like the ultimate buy low in, if you ran like an air yards model or anything like that, Cornell Powell would be massively popping for whatever reason. He's been open. Jordan Teamu's just missing him. And Jordan Teamu's hitting Ty Scott. He's hitting Chris Rowland. So, I think it's going to happen eventually for Cornell Powell. Certainly excited to play a guy, 5K, 10 to 15% ownership who could push for a 20 or 25% target share in a game DC is going to trail. That to me sounds like a pretty appealing profile. Backfield, I think, is a lot tougher. Something that was interesting last week, and I went back and forth with Chris a little bit on this when we were projecting these guys. Deion Jackson actually got more red zone work than Abram Smith, but Abram Smith was the one who dominated in carries. Let me pull the numbers here up for you guys. Yeah, Abram Smith, 18 rush attempts, 2 targets. Deion Jackson was at 12 rush attempts with 0 targets. Again, a little bit more red zone work, 3 total red zone rushes for Deion Jackson last week, 0 for Abram Smith. I still think Abram Smith is the lead back here. I'll have to, unfortunately, because of PFF's delayed data release, I won't be able to check snap numbers until after this show. But it does seem like, maybe 70-30 in favor of Abram Smith. Problem, Neil, like we've harped on, he doesn't catch any passes. Very comparable profile to a guy like Derrick Henry. This doesn't really feel like the game to play him, but we'll also get a significant ownership discount. Probably won't be more than 5, 6, 7%.
Yeah, and I think that's probably right. I won't have more than that. I might have less than 5, 6, 7% we're projected for. It's just like the game script does not favor him. The matchup with St. Louis, again, only 118 passing yards. It's 103 rushing yards per game. And he just hasn't been very good. Like, he's just been kind of mediocre. He's a little bit too expensive for a not amazing role. I don't know. Ultimately, I think just like the lack of pass catching, the split workload, the tough matchup, the price tag, all of that is like, even at low ownership, I guess he could score 2 touchdowns. Again, we saw Davion Smith do it. If Davion Smith can do it, then I think Abram Smith can do it also. But I think I'll be underweight here.
Yep, think that makes sense. Moving on to the St. Louis side, we talked a little bit at the top of the show about full-blown, onslaught stacks, playing a ton of guys from the same team in the same lineup. I think if you're going to do it with any team, St. Louis is probably the easiest to do it with. This offense has looked awesome. They aren't throwing much. Their pass rate's only been, right around 40, 45% in both of these last 2 games, but Manny Wilkins is running incredibly well. Jacob Sailors has looked like a true bell cow. He's pushing, if he continued this pace, he would push for the second best workload by a spring football running back ever. I did sort of speculate a little bit ahead of week 2. Maybe we see Jarvion Howard emerge a little bit more. Nope, that was not the case. Jacob Sailor still dominating backfield usage here. Also worth noting, I believe it's Kevon Latulas was active last week. He basically only played special teams until the final couple drives of the 4th quarter. So he's not someone to worry about. I really think it's just a special teams thing with him. I don't think he's going to get any offensive snaps when these games are close. Neil, we can start with Manny Wilkins. Coming in at massive ownership, but he kind of does feel like one of the only quarterbacks we can trust this week, especially because he provides an awesome rushing floor. He scrambles on about 20% of his dropbacks, which is an absurd number. Where are you at on Wilkins? Because he is going to be super popular, and then we can talk about Sailors, who's also going to be super popular.
Yeah, I think it's pretty reasonable. Like, I think he should be the most popular quarterback on the slate. I don't know that I'm going to get up to the 36%. Like, I'm fairly certain that I'm not going to get quite that high. I think I'll probably mix in more of the other receivers here. The other quarterbacks here. But at the same time, like, I don't love any quarterback on this slate. So it's hard to be like, oh yeah, this is way too much, when it's like, yeah, he's clearly the best. Like, he just is the best fantasy quarterback here. Like, the role has been awesome. The rushing is really strong. The team environment really good. They have the highest team total on the weekend. Yep. So tough to really argue with it. I'll probably, maybe I'll set my quarterback cap at 30% and get to 30% Manny Wilkins. So when I say I'll be underweight, I'll probably be slightly underweight. And I don't even know if I I think I will. I think I'll probably stay there and get to some different stacks. But yeah, no, I think it's a really strong for Manny Wilkins. Jacob Saylor. So we were speculating. I was talking with Nadi OM about what was Jacob Saylor's price tag going to be this week. Comes up $500. We're still projecting him for about the same ownership we had last week, and I think it's totally reasonable. It is not the best matchup here, so I will say that. Like from what we've seen so far, that they've only allowed, a total of 231.5 yards per game total. DC's allowed, so the defense has been pretty good. Not exactly like a smash spot. Maybe there's some touchdown regression for Sailors. So I don't think I'm going to be above weight to 50%. I know I've seen people speculate, or people have suggested like he's just a lock, just like play him in every lineup, and I think that's a defensible stance. But I don't think I'm going to take that stance. I think I'll probably have around around 50%.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't blame you at all if you wanted to play Jacob Sailors in every lineup. I think what has really surprised me about Sailors' usage isn't his 14 rushing attempts per game. That's kind of roughly what we anticipated coming into the year. 4.5 targets per game through 2 games. Now, I've harped, this is the second week in a row, I've said, this team runs a ton of screens. Greg Ward is third in the UFL with 3 screens. Jacob Sailors has 5. Ja'Cour Pearson has 6. So way ahead of the next closest player. And that gives Sailors, an even better floor than just his raw rushing workload would imply. I mean, it seems like he's pretty much a lock for a couple catches, and they're going to be, not just checkdowns, but designed screen targets that I think generally have the potential to go for more yards, especially with a talented back like Sailors, than something like a checkdown would. My other note on Sailors, and this is something, again, we anticipated coming into the year, but it's really popped so far, is hyper efficiency. Teams really have to account for Manny Wilkins whenever he does, a handoff, read option, whatever. You have to make sure you have the quarterback covered. Jacob Sailors, 10 points more than his weighted opportunity suggested last week, and 6.5 points more than his weighted opportunity suggested in week 1. I mean, it's always hard to bet on hyper efficiency, but if I could pick any player to be hyper efficient from this point forward, it would be Jacob Sailors. I would not be surprised if he finished the year averaging 5 yards per carry or even a little bit more. This is a very, very good role. And we saw it last week. They obviously took San Antonio a bit more seriously than Houston. Jacob Sailors played more. We saw less Jarvion Howard there in the second half of that game. So yeah, if DC is able to keep this game close, Jacob Sailors will probably end up playing more than we saw in week 1, week 2. Another great point there. Do you have any interest in playing like Jacob Sailors with Jarvion Howard in the hope that St. Louis just goes absolutely nuts? Or where would you draw the line there? Is it just Sailors for you?
So Sailors is 10,500. Jarvion Howard. Yeah, I think it's sort of tough to get there with the 16,000 combined salary for those two. Yeah. I don't think it's not out of the question. So I guess my answer would be, if you want to do it, like we just saw it work out 2 weeks ago. And on the one hand, DC has been tough against the run so far, but on the other hand, again, they lost their defensive coordinator. Maybe there's a little bit of a learning adjustment period here, so maybe they're not quite as good this week. And maybe even if they were as good as they have been, I mean, St. Louis has also been just unstoppable. Yeah, I think it's borderline. I think you could do it. It's a bit expensive. I also like we mentioned earlier, about these games moving fast. On the one hand, I'm like, guys, once you get into that 10,000 plus price range, it's like easier to fail because the games fail from a point per dollar standpoint. But on the other hand, it's like, even if you only, like, a failure would be 15 fantasy points would be, I would consider that kind of a failure for Jacob Sailors. And that probably is good enough. Like, to be honest, it's not really a failure. And like his floor, obviously barring like an injury, his floor is probably 12 fantasy points, 14 fantasy points, which is like almost good enough even at this price tag. So I don't know. I'm waffling on, like, do you just lock him in? Like, part of me is like, I think that's a defensible standpoint. I think ultimately I'm still going to come back to, I'll probably end up with just around 50%, but waffling a little bit. Howard, I'm probably not going to play a ton of Jarvion Howard. Like you said, Jacob Sailors has been mostly a bell cow. Like, he's mostly, he showed that he has the juice to pay it off in a limited workload, and maybe they do use him more if they do get a big enough lead here. But it's also, both teams are undefeated, so I don't think they would quickly go away from Jacob Sailors.
Yeah. I'm right there with you. I think this will probably be the hardest we see St. Louis try in a game to date. And obviously that would benefit Jacob Sailors pretty significantly. We can talk about these pass catchers really quick. I will start by saying, if you're going to play Manny Wilkins, you really don't need to play any of these guys. Manny Wilkins' rushing work is so good that I do not think you need to pair him with a pass catcher. I'm sort of going to mix and match it throughout my lineups. I also think totally fine to play Wilkins and Sailors together in the same lineup, even though they do cannibalize a little bit of each other's rushing upside, especially near the goal line. Neil, I'm curious where you're at on these wide receivers. We didn't see like much of a role increase for Ja'Cour Pearson last week, still decent number of screens, pretty low ADOT type player. We saw Denzel Mims play a little bit more. Frank Darby and Gary Jennings are obviously out there too. None of these guys are popping in projections though, because, we have St. Louis projected for only a 48%, 50% pass rate. Where do you fall on these pass catchers and how are you viewing Manny Wilkins stacks overall right now?
Yeah, I think you can go with Manny Wilkins, Ja'Cour Pearson stacks once again. I still like Ja'Cour Pearson, and I like that you can stack him, even though, like you said, you don't really need to with Manny Wilkins. Like, I still think there's like mega upside there with Manny Wilkins and Ja'Cour Pearson. And his role, like you said, has been pretty good, even though he did not see the increase that I kind of expected him to see a big workload increase with no Hakeem Butler. But I guess he already had a really strong role. So yeah, I think the price tag is totally reasonable. 20% ownership seems fine. And I like it better paired up with Manny Wilkins. So yeah, I like it. It gets a little bit rough pretty quickly behind him. And I'd like to see what the numbers are there on like a Frank Darby, Gary Jennings. Like what do those numbers come in at? Do you have that in front of you?
I can pull them up here. So Ja'Cour Pearson was out there for 100% of routes last week. Keep in mind, only 22 routes from St. Louis. So again, they're just really not attempting many passes. Gary Jennings was at 77% of routes. Denzel Mims was at 55%. Blake Jackson actually was at 55%, which is pretty high for him. And then I would need to check PFF on Frank Darby specifically because he did not earn a target. So he's not popping up here. Hold on. I got it. Darby was at 14 routes. So just behind Blake Jackson, that'd be like a 45% route share. Not as much as I was anticipating from Darby. I thought we'd see a little bit more of him. But yeah, pretty spread out there in terms of the route share after Ja'Cour.
I mean, Gary Jennings, 77% stands out a little bit as so I think he would be the other one I would take a shot. He's only 3,900 projected for 2% ownership. I think that's totally fine dart throw.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think if I had to pick a guy after Ja'Cour Pearson, it would be Gary Jennings. For what it's worth, and I don't put as much weight on Anthony Beck's coach speak as I do maybe a Skip Holt or a Mike Nolan. Anthony Beck did say that for the 2024 season, Gary Jennings was with the team in the 2023 XFL. For 2024, they really wanted him back. According to Beck, they had big plans for Gary Jennings. Gary Jennings opted to sign with Birmingham instead, then came back. So I think Gary Jennings is effectively in the same role we saw Stephen Mitchell in the last couple seasons, where he's going to be running a lot of clear out routes. Maybe they'll occasionally throw him a screen, but he's always live for that 80-yard touchdown. So certainly something to keep in mind. There's a showdown for this slate. And of course, this is on the 2-game Sunday only slate. I think Gary Jennings is pretty sneaky for both of those. Main slate going to be trickier to get to, but if you need a salary saver and you're playing a bunch of Wilkins, I don't necessarily hate it. Neil, I think that just about does it. Yeah, don't think there's anyone else I want to talk about here on the St. Louis side. As always, guys, really appreciate everybody who tuned in live or is watching the recording of this, and we wish you all the best of luck in week 3, and we will see you all at the top of the leaderboards.
What? Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.